Number one, training is most important as a competency, so we're very good at doing our job and maintaining lethality. The transition was more about finding who I was again and not erasing my 30-year identity as a sailor.
Produced by Podcast Architects.
You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Welcome back to another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. I'm David Dearie with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. Please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Joining me today is an old friend, good friend, fellow shipmate, Mike Magnetta. Mike, how are you today?
Oh, I'm wonderful, David. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you have a lot going on, and I'm glad we were able to squeeze a few minutes in this morning. Mike is a 30-year Navy veteran. He started his career as an operations specialist, worked his way up the ranks, and then he eventually, when the opportunity presented itself, came over to the Command Master Chief side, did a number of tours as a Command Master Chief before transitioning out of the service after 30 years. Mike, I'd like to start these conversations off with just a little easy softball question. What's the worst piece of leadership advice that someone ever gave you?
Wow. I was blessed throughout my career to have some great leaders. So there's not a bunch that jumps out to me as being bad advice. Anything that I'd categorize as bad would be a piece of advice that would take me away from who I was, away from my core, to try to be something I wasn't. And those tend to end up bad if I followed that advice that took me away from who I actually was as a person, as a man, as a sailor.
You know, that just strikes me as what you hear, what we hear so much today, being that authentic self. So I think that what you described would be a great definition when somebody says, you know, not just being my authentic self, but when somebody is presenting, you know, maybe some direction, some mentoring and stuff. If it's going to take you away from who you really are, maybe you need to think twice about that. Which, you know, ironically, and this is not pre-rehearsed, that kind of leads us into the topic pretty smoothly of valuing training as a leader. You know, some people may think that when you get to the really senior levels of leadership, and senior level leadership doesn't have to be a sergeant major, a command master chief, or even a flag officer. I think a senior level of leadership, somebody said in a previous podcast, was grow where you're planted. And wherever you're planted as a leader, you've never arrived. You should never have that attitude. So share a little bit about why you think that we need to value training as a leader.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I'm going to go back real quick to grow where you're planted, because I think that's just a great mantra for being the best person, best sailor you can possibly be. There are external factors that many times you can't control. When you're there in that flower pot, you can control those things. How much sun you allow yourself to get, the fresh air that you take in. So grow your planted, I think, is just a wonderful mantra. Back to the value of training, I think it's important for many reasons. One, when you're mission oriented, you've got to be able to do your job. That should be first and foremost. And we've seen Navy leaders throughout the years at the very senior levels create different types of slogans or methods for us to be very good, to maintain our lethality, to be the best possible Navy we could be. And all that really boils down to training at the unit and the individual level. So number one, training is most important as a competency, so we're very good at doing our job and maintaining lethality. Another reason I think training is so important is it is the key influencer for morale, in my opinion. People say morale. How do I make morale better on the deck plates? How do I make my unit level morale better, or even bigger, Navy-wide? How do we be better at morale? It's not ice cream socials and pizza night. I think it's being really, really good at your job. The pride, the confidence that comes along with being an expert in your field, and then being able to exercise those competencies, I believe, really is the best way to create and maintain good morale.
Yeah, and expert in field is not just being a great technician and understanding, there's always changes taking place with automation and technology, so we're always relearning the new ways of doing the same thing. But an expert in leadership, right? Because, and the value of training is training yourself as a leader. I think that sometimes we can, if we take this "I've arrived" attitude, even if we, and I don't think people sit there and actually say to themselves "I've arrived," but it's like you start taking your pack off. Maybe you don't think you could advance to the next level, so then they're like, "Well, what's the point?" Well, the point is you're still in a leadership position for those your peers and those below, and I think that that's so important, and that was really one of the reasons why we started the Enlist Leadership Foundation, is to provide an opportunity for people to continue in their leadership development. So even when you transitioned out of the Navy some years ago, did you find yourself complacent as to where you were, or did you continue to grow as a leader?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit because you talked about taking the pack off, and what I tend to phrase as somebody resting on their laurels. They're very comfortable in that position, and they don't have to, or they feel they don't have to pick up that leadership book or go to the symposiums or challenge themselves to be better. I always write when I make entries into a CPO charge book about arriving, somebody thinking that they've arrived. I actually contradict that and say it's just beginning. You think you've climbed the top of the mountain. Well, you've got another 10,000 feet to go. So that development really starts to take place once you've mastered being good at your core competencies in your job, and those sharpening the knife as a leader takes repeated effort, and it's endless. You're never a finished product as far as I'm concerned as a leader. And that includes, to answer your question, getting out of the military, right? We tend to become experts in every single thing in the military, right? In our positions, we're the ones who are sought after for our sage advice because it's more than likely that we've been there and done that. Except for that one thing that we've never done, and that's separate from the military. And I tend to see people who are a little in denial sometimes. They don't want to face that challenge, or they think they know everything, which could be a disaster for somebody if they don't want to learn and be humble enough to learn new things. But I had a lot to learn, and I tend to try to take those lessons that I learned in my separation and share them as much as possible with people who are getting out. Whether it's after 4 years or 36 years, I tend to share my experiences to help them out.
Since you've referred back to a couple comments I made, I'm going to refer back to when you said about ice cream socials and
nothing against ice cream.
No,
nothing
God,
against
no.
those things. Important elements of what we do.
No, they absolutely are. I was at a event last night for my corporate job that I have, and it was at a Sailor of the Year event. And I had read something over the last few days that I was able to share, and it was something I had not. It's one of those that I think I knew, but I never put into context or words. But what I read is, as a leader, there's a difference between nice and kind, and I think that when I think of like the socials or giving, giving people more time off, or maybe being, having to be brutally honest. You know, it's nice to provide the socials and things like that, but it's not very nice if there's an opportunity for me to be brutally honest with you, and because I don't want to hurt your feelings or I want to avoid confrontation, and I don't take that opportunity. It's kind when I do. You know, it's kind if I listen. I understand that you finished up your stuff at 10 in the morning, and the workday goes till 3 in the afternoon. There's always something more that we can continue to learn and to do. It may be nice to get off work 5 hours early, but you know what happens if you get off work early and you get yourself in some trouble because you had too much time off? You know, that's not very kind. So I just thought that I just keep thinking about that, and then when you talk about climbing up that mountain, I don't think the mountain ever stops. I think we reach plateaus, and I think on that plateau we run the risk of taking off our pack or maybe just catching a breath, and I think it's about catching a breath. And I think some people need to catch a breath. I think when you promote, how many, and I'm sure it's like this across all branches, but how many in the Navy did we see somebody, man, they've selected for chief and they're going through the initiation process. They haven't even put on their anchors and they're already thinking about senior chief, right? And I can even remember when I was the region master chief, I'd been at the job, I don't know, 6-8 months. And I got a phone call from somebody who had been at their job for about 2 or 3 months. And they're calling me saying, hey, Dave, what's your plan? Our PRDs are going to match up or something. I'm thinking, my goodness, I'm still trying to figure my job out. You've been at your job less time, and you're not even, if you're thinking about your next career change after 2 months, what value are you adding to the people where you're at? So I think we have to embrace the plateau. I think the plateau doesn't mean that we sit back and I've arrived, but that plateau is necessary for the training and the development so that we can then, that's how we get back up that mountain. If we sit on that plateau and don't grow where we're planted, well, then we've kind of petered out, and people that we have the opportunity to lead suffer because we become complacent.
To your point, I don't think that always needs to be a bad thing if a person can recognize their limitations. And
No, I agree.
by my own example, and I admire the Jason Hawkas, the Suze Whitmans, David Twyford, guys who've they're much bigger thinkers than I, and my aspirations were always modest, and I felt myself as an excellent deck plate leader on a smaller command. I really felt that's where I was supposed to be in the Navy, and that's what my leadership style really allowed me to be very, very good at and have success at, and for my commands to have success. I tend not to be a larger strategic thinker. Some of the names that I had given you previously, those guys are great at that. I just never saw myself, and it wasn't that I was unwilling to challenge myself to take those positions like that. It's that I really felt that I belonged in the smaller unit level situations.
And a sign of a humble leader, and I could not agree with you more. I tell people that I think at some points in my career I promoted too fast. And by promoting, who's going to turn down a promotion, right? But by promoting too fast, I was not as good of a leader as I probably could have been had I had an opportunity to grow a little longer in certain situations. So it made it harder on me, which then in turn made it more difficult for those that I led. We made it through. Nobody got hurt or injured or nothing. But I understand that most of what we do is training. 99% of what we do is training for the 1% that we are actually in the fight. And I will say, Mike, I've name dropped you for many, many years, and the impact that you've had on the fleet fighter and family is significant. People light up when they hear your name. They say nothing but complimentary things about you as a person and as a leader. And it's so I say all that to say not to pump up your ego by any stretch, but it's really more to just show how important it is to know what not limitations, maybe it's capacity, maybe it's just knowing and it's not even a comfort level, right? Because you didn't want to stay there so you didn't have to grow, but you felt that's where the sweet spot of who you are as a person and the impact that you can have. And that is great. And there's evidence to support that. I've known a lot of people that don't recognize that, and they end up reaching a point that they probably should not have been, because a lot of people were too nice along the way instead of being kind. So let's go back to talking about transitioning and the work that you're doing and that you've been doing for many years with VFW. So Veterans of Foreign Wars, many times we look at VFW or other kind of veteran-like organizations that are in existence today, and there's a certain vision, visual maybe, that comes to mind that I think you and others are trying to move away from. So tell us about VFW and how the VFW and how Mike Magnetta, retired Command Master Chief and now retired from your corporate job, transitioning a second time, but yet this something that seems to be stable, and there's your love for the military and the VFW, and how that helps you, and why we should be interested in it, and how the VFW works with transitioning. So there's a whole lot there for you to talk about.
Yeah, there sure is, and thanks for the opportunity. Leaving the military leaves a void for all of us, and you have to ask yourself, how are you going to fill that void? I always knew that I wanted to give back to those who are currently serving and to those who have served honorably and are considered veterans. And the best way I found to do that, to continue serving, was through the VFW. Now, when you leave service, most people have opportunities to contribute to the American Legion, Navy League, VFW. There's a plethora of organizations that they're going to want to get you involved so you can continue to help serving those who serve. But VFW for me really hit home. There are a couple of reasons for it. I know you were kind of trending towards that stereotype of going into that old VFW or American Legion hall, and you see the World War II, Korean, Vietnam veterans smoking and drinking and telling war stories. There is certainly much more to it than that. And quite frankly, I don't even see that really anymore. You're seeing a transition away from post homes where the bar, the canteen is the primary focus. The primary focus for the VFW is to serve veterans. And we're not doing that in halls and canteens. We're doing that in high schools by promoting Americanism and patriotism. We're doing that in Veterans Affairs policy making. We're doing that on Capitol Hill by providing testimony that benefits veterans. So there's many other ways that the VFW is serving rather than just sitting in that old smoky bar room telling those stories. So what compelled me to be more involved and to eventually become an officer and become a post commander in the VFW was the fact that I looked at it as an obligation. As we see our World War II veterans, our Korean War veterans becoming fewer and fewer as they're passing away, and our most senior folks in the VFW are now our Vietnam veterans, and they're anywhere between age 75 and 82. And they've carried the load for quite some years being leaders in the VFW. And I look at it as an obligation for our generation to be able to take over, to keep the VFW going strong for those who are currently serving and those who will serve in the wake of our service. So we can do the same thing that those previous generations of leaders did for us. Every veteran benefit that you have wasn't given to you out of the kindness of the federal government or the Department of Defense. It was earned through service. It was not. It was earned through service and earned through the hard work of organizations like the VFW and the American Legion, who fought and won the benefits that we currently enjoy today. That's why I do it.
And so how long have you been working volunteering with? Because I don't think you get compensated.
Well, the compensation comes in many forms, and
Yes.
one, seeing a Vietnam veteran take an honor flight to D.C. To see their comrades' names on the wall for the first time.
Yeah.
Compensation comes in the form of helping a young veteran who's transitioning get a VA claim started so they can get compensation provided for what they earned in their service. So those are the ways that I see myself getting paid, seeing the smiles on the faces. Another form of compensation, actually, I'll share something that just happened. I have a fairly small post here in a very small town in the middle of America, Grays Lake, Illinois. And we just had a young student, an eighth grader, write an essay for Patriots Pen. Patriots Pen it's an essay contest for sixth through eighth graders in which they can share their opinions on a given topic. And this last year's given topic was about our democracy and what are the benefits of our democracy. And to hear an eighth grader explain what they felt about our democracy, one was a very talented student, and she went on to win at the state level. And out of tens of thousands of essays for our small town to have an eighth grader be at the top of that rack and stack was very impressive. And that, to me, that form of compensation was probably the best because we had our own small town hero and somebody who was able to express themselves about our democracy and did us proud.
You're listening to a conversation with Command Master Retired Mike Magnetta. Be sure to click on the show notes below and subscribe to the Enlist Leadership Foundation Lead On podcast. So, Mike, you talked about VA claims and what have you. Excuse me, not whatever. So that, which is very important. So, along with the VA claims, what else would somebody show up if I'm a 28-year-old E5 that just transitioned out, and I may be married with a kid, and I'm relocating back to my hometown. I assume there's probably going to be a VFW in the vicinity. What would I expect, or what would I hope to find by going to, a VFW, especially if I maybe have a certain perception of, based on storytelling or whatever. But then I heard the podcast, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go see what this Mike guy was talking about.
Well, one, I encourage everybody who's eligible to take a look at the VFW. Again, I look at it as an obligation. The benefits that we enjoy today were given to us because men and women of previous generations worked hard to fight and secure those benefits for us. And I look at it as an obligation, one, to preserve those benefits and to fight for the benefits of those of future service. There are many serving today, and again, I talked about as we lose our World War II, Korean War veterans, and eventually our Vietnam veterans, the onus or the, I don't want to say burden because I don't look at it as a burden, but the responsibility of ownership for the VFW is going to fall on our shoulders. Folks like you and I, and then those who served in the wake of our service and those who are serving today. Anyone who has earned a Global War on Terror Expeditionary Medal is eligible to join the VFW. And again, I encourage all to do so. At least check it out, become a member. There's strength in our number. And as the previous generations of warriors and heroes pass away, that number has been shrinking year over year. And Congress tends to listen a little bit less when the voice becomes a bit more muted. The way for us to continue our veteran voice to be strong is to keep that number high, and the ears of our Congress will perk up and listen because we're also voters.
Yeah, and I think that right there is that obligation piece that you speak of, because there it is a very powerful voice on Capitol Hill. When whether changes come to healthcare for retirees, VA benefit changes, the different things you may hear on the radio, new kind of claims and things. A lot of that is started with, or at least promoted from, the leaders in the VFW that have this. I know VFW has an office on right behind the Capitol up there in Washington D.C. I've been to it, and it's a very, very powerful voice. And yeah, if the membership declines and people, because maybe we take a selfish, I don't want to give $35 a year or whatever the cost is, and there doesn't seem to be anything in it for me. Well, you'll realize what was in it for you when you start losing some of those benefits. Because once benefits are gone, it's unlikely to come back. It's just like if you're at a job and somebody in an important position quits and that void doesn't get filled, but then you can go 6, 12, 18 months without it. Well, then leadership says, well, we didn't need it in the first place. Look at all the money we just saved. But yet, those of us that have to pick up that slack, then it just becomes the norm, and then you forget. And interestingly enough, too, with transition, I heard it said some time ago, the military could spend, in some cases, $100,000 to train you to do a job, which is when we think about it, we can look at an 18, 19-year-old on, applying for a job. You're not qualified. Well, every 18, 19-year-old is qualified for something in the military, and some of those 18, 19-year-olds, they learn over a course of several months how to operate or repair multi-million-dollar equipment that the government, taxpayers, may have paid $100,000 or more to train them to do, and they do it really well, right? That young trooper, but yet the government spends about anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to transition us out. So someone like me and you that did 30 years, it's all we've known pretty much. Man, I personally, I didn't learn a whole lot transitioning out by going through, nothing against Transition Assistance Program, TGPS, whatever. And so what advice, besides encouraging those transitioning military to join a VFW, their local VFW, was there anything that you learned in your transition that you wish you would have known, but you were able to figure it out, that you share with others? So what's some of the top things that as both as a military member who's transitioning out should be aware of, and what about an employer that may be considering hiring a veteran could be looking, if they don't have the qualifications for a specific job, why should we take the chance?
Great questions. Now, I tend to find, at least with my own experience, that my transition was less about programs. Do I take a survivor's benefit? What type of TRICARE do I get? Those types of things. Make sure you do your VA claim. The advice that people would give you, it's almost cursory. There was no substance to it. And TGPS, I think, it's a valuable tool, but it's only scratching the surface. There's much hard work to do in addition to TGPS. My own experience was the transition was more about finding who I was again, and not erasing my 30-year identity as a sailor, but seeing who I was in my post-military life. And that took me some time. It's the best advice that I give to those who are transitioning, particularly careerists, that are going to have to learn new things. I tend to go back often to a trait that we teach and promote as chief petty officers, and that's humility. Because again, when we think we know everything, we're probably at our most dangerous and our most vulnerable. So humility is something that I tend to offer to others as they're transitioning. Again, for me, it was really about, it was more emotional, psychological, Do I grow a beard? Do I grow my hair out? Do I keep those things that I learned in the Navy? Do I discard them? And the answer is it's a blend of all of those things. The Navy created who I am by instilling core values in me. Those things will never go away. So I tend to have taken core values, of course, with me into my post-military life. But finding the tribe or the circle, again, VFW was it for me. And I'd never really answered your previous question about what do we offer that 28-year-old that's transitioning. The biggest void that comes with leaving the military, in my opinion, is camaraderie. We tend to see the veteran suicide crisis, people feeling like they don't belong. I think those are really lack of a tribe. We were really good at it in the military, all branches of service, whether it's our rate or our job field or who we deployed with. Those things are so important to us. And one day you have a DD-214 in your hand, and those things are gone. They just don't exist anymore. So finding ways to fill that void through a new tribe, and that's what I really believe that VFW or other veteran services organizations or other veteran groups, and there are many out there, will provide to somebody who's transitioning. But bottom line, my best advice is find that tribe, and then I think the other things will tend to fall into place.
And I appreciate, Mike, that which is, again, a testament of your character. As much as you would love for people to join the VFW, recognizing that there's other organizations that may fit you better. And so wherever you find yourself, check them all out. It's like going to a church. It's hard to find a church, but when you find the one that fits you, okay, and none of them are perfect, but there's some that fit us better than others.
That's right. So. And VFW happened to be my landing spot. There are many great organizations, but I felt most comfortable, most at home, and I felt I had the ability to do the most good with VFW. So that's why I landed with VFW.
Yeah, and for me, it's the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. It's being able to provide the podcast, be able to our two main leadership programs, the Echo 5 for E5s and the Foundry for the E6s. And we've talked for years and years about expanding our. We have ideas for E4 program. We have ideas for a senior enlisted program. In fact, not just ideas. We've actually moved towards those. But ultimately, we're really good at this sweet spot of E5 and E6s. We'll never run out. They're very hungry, and we just want to continue to be good and get better there than try to bring on other stuff on the fringes, if you will. Well, listen, we are man. Time goes by, and we're about out of it. But I want to ask, one final fun question, if you will. So, was there ever a time in your career that you had to make a leadership decision that, really didn't go the way you wanted to go, but you kind of dodged a bullet, right? Nobody got hurt, but you were sweating it. You're like, oh man, that was a close call. What was it, and then what'd you do with that lesson?
Boy, that's a good question right there. I tend to think that I'd answer it by going back to my time as a recruit division commander. You're out on an island a little bit, and I'm going to, you're there with a recruit division commander. Of course, it's just an amazing job. And for anyone listening who's interested, if you have the opportunity, it is a life and career changing job. And I would encourage anybody, I believe all of our senior enlisted leaders should do a tour as a recruit division commander, because that is a great way to hone those leadership skills. But to answer your question, I found myself alone in a compartment with 88 recruits, and I had made a decision that I was sticking to. that probably wasn't a very good decision, was probably ran contrary to instructions, the instructions that I was given. I was a fairly new recruit division commander. I was a fairly new senior chief petty officer, and I probably was maybe a little intoxicated by having 88 recruits listen to exactly what you say. And again, that could be very dangerous. And luckily, I was rescued, if you will, by it was a petty officer, a second class petty officer, that came in to the compartment and righted my wrong without calling too much attention to what I was doing incorrectly, and then had the courage to take me aside kindly, to put it in your terms, and tell me that what I was doing was trending in a very bad direction. And I appreciated one, that conversation, and I appreciated that petty officer who is now retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer as well. But I found myself about to do the wrong thing, and as a senior chief, I was corrected by a second class petty officer, and they were right to do it. And I was a friend of theirs ever since, and remain a great friend today.
I'll tell you, man, that is such a great. There's so much that we can have a whole podcast, a whole lesson on that. And what's so cool too is the guest that's going to be dropped before this episode has a similar story, where it was a junior person that pulled this Master Chief aside, maybe Senior Chief at the time, and so and what the courage it takes. And so for anybody listening from any branch, if when you see you can save a life, you can save a career. When we would go through a Navy exchange and see some senior leader on the cover of the Navy Times, it's not the first time that they did something, but it was finally somebody stood up and said something. But how many people could have said something much sooner that would have prevented a whole wake of disaster? And because that person on the cover probably has a family that probably shops at the commissary of the exchange, that will see their husband, wife, father, mother, something. So, man, that's great that second class, and that you let that individual do it. That probably you even snapped out of that intoxicated state, like, oh my gosh. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your friendship. I enjoy the time that I get to spend with you and to see you.
Likewise, David.
And it's been a great conversation. I hope one person benefits from our time together, just like the leaders that we were or are. If one person benefits, it was worth it. So with that, I want to thank you for listening. You've been to another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leader. You've been listening to my guest today, Command Master Chief Retired Michael Magnetta. Mike, again, thank you. Last word over to you.
Now, David, thanks for having me. I've watched and listened to the podcast for quite some time. I've always admired what you've done with Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I've had sailors pining to go and participate in Foundry and all the great things that you've done. I still see it today. It's growing. It's getting better. It's making our sailors better. It's making our Navy better. And again, I'm humbled to be part of it. You're right. You said it. If we were able to help somebody out, one sailor, one person out there, make them a little bit better, then it's all worth it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. Once again, I'm David Dearie with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, and this has been another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. Please subscribe and check us out at our website, W-cubed, enlistedleadershipfoundation.org.
Produced by Podcast Architects.